let us answer some hypothetical fish-related questions. What if every fish in the world disappeared at once? This is basically a speculative evolution type thing, but specifically just talking about fish and how the environment and the world would change. I kind of focused on people because a lot of the impacts are on people, and it makes sense to focus on people as a person, since that's what people mostly care about. So we have to set aside some rules because you could interpret, fish disappearing in a lot of different ways. Like when I say every fish disappears at once, a lot of things can happen. So first rule, the fish did not die and they do not leave behind bodies. That would create an entirely different world where all of these bodies have to decay, and that affects ecosystems in entirely different ways. So they didn't die and they don't leave behind any trace or any, nutrients, any kind of existence. Fish, we have to define fish, as always, starts with lancelets and ends with the diversion into any other class of animal. So what is traditionally considered fish nowadays? I don't mean the taxonomical definition of fish, where you include all the mammals and the birds and the reptiles and the amphibians and such. And then the last rule is that fish did exist prior to this disappearance. So it's as if literally right now in time, every fish in the world just disappeared, but they existed prior to that. So the ecosystems haven't evolved without them. They haven't had the chance because they've just now disappeared. And and with those rules in mind, we are going to talk about what would happen. So the first thing is starvation. Starvation would happen. Unsurprisingly, coastal communities in the world have fish as 70% of their protein intake on average. That's on average. That means that some communities have fish as 100% of their protein intake. So there will be many, many communities, especially in third world countries, that would end up starving. People who rely on the fishing industry in their local area, especially in island areas, to eat. 17% of all the meat consumed worldwide is fish. So take out 17% of the protein taken in by people in the world from diets. That's obviously going to cause a lot of starvation and issues in that way. And over 3 billion people worldwide have fish as 20% or more of their protein intake. So if 20% of your protein intake, here, let me switch so you guys can see. What is that? There we go. If 20% of your protein intake is fish on average for almost half of the world's population, you're losing a lot of protein intake. So the reality is that probably millions, probably tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people would end up starving or being nutrient deficient. Another direct effect is job loss. 10 to 12% of human beings, of all the human beings in existence on the earth, 1 in 10 or more rely on fish as their main source of income. So whether they're the ones fishing, they own the boats or the equipment for the fishing, they manage the fishing, they sell the fish, they cook the fish. Regardless, 1 in 10 people on earth, 1 in 10 human beings on earth, and keep in mind, lots of these people are located in island or coastal communities in third world countries. If you were talking about just the United States, it's probably less than like 1 in 1,000 people that rely on fish as their main source of income. But then if you go to places like Malaysia or the Philippines, it's probably closer to like 15-20%. So it averages out to about 1 in 10 people. And many governments have entire departments dedicated to fisheries. So when I stayed in Malaysia, they had a fisheries department of the government, which was just in charge of managing all of the fishing that was being done commercially for food, to make sure that people don't starve and to make sure that there is enough fish being harvested for people to eat. When we went to Malaysia, I asked, because in America, anywhere you go to fish, you need a fishing license, and you need various licenses for various states and different parts of different states, whether it's saltwater or freshwater or different fish that you're targeting. And I asked in Malaysia, I said, what do I need to do about licensing? Like, what kind of license do I need to get? And they were like, what do you mean a license? The person who was taking me around basically said, what the hell are you talking about? You don't have a license, because it's so ingrained in the culture, and it's just considered a basic right of a person in Malaysia to be able to catch fish wherever they want to and whatever fish they want to and harvest them and eat them. That having a license is a ridiculous concept. Then we've got ecosystem collapse, the kind of obvious one that you would have expected me to talk about maybe a little bit earlier. This is kind of hard to measure. I'm calling it a direct consequence, but the amount of like indirect consequences that would come from this are basically impossible to measure, because every ecosystem in the world that is aquatic, regardless of salinity, temperature, or pollution levels, there are fish there, right? Like, any salt water in the world, there's fish in it somewhere. Most fresh water in the world, there's fish in it somewhere. Highly adapted fish, even in the extreme environments. There are literally pools in the middle of the desert in hot water that have a species of pupfish that live in them at all times. So the basic model of how the ecosystems do collapse, though, is in ecosystems where fish are primarily the predators, the prey levels would spike. So say they're keeping under control, the fish are eating the algae, right? Well, if now the algae is going to go crazy, which is going to consume all the oxygen, which is going to lead to eutrophication, and the oxygen levels in the ecosystem drop, and basically everything in the ecosystem dies because there's no longer oxygen, because the fish disappeared. If the fish are primarily prey in the ecosystem, the predators die off, which leads to them not being able to consume, like back here, not being able to consume the prey. If the prey is algae, for example, or down the line, it spikes, no more oxygen in the ecosystem dies. If you take out a major segment of the ecosystem, which fish are in almost all aquatic ecosystems in the world, it all comes back to basically everything dying, other than highly adapted and resilient species. Indirect consequences. Do humans survive? Yeah, probably. I don't think that all humans would die if fish disappeared. But it's hard to even consider, because it's not just aquatic ecosystems. If all of the aquatic ecosystems in the world collapse, the terrestrial ecosystems will too. Like, even the most inland, middle of nowhere, let's say middle of Canada, is affected by the local aquatic ecosystems. So if those aquatic ecosystems are collapsing, chances are the terrestrial ecosystems will as well. So giant losses of food source and ton of other revenue sources, and just total ecosystem collapse across the world if the fish would disappear. But, and this feels like a bit of a weird slide to put in, because this has been extremely negative, because all of these things would crazy happen if fish disappeared. But there would be so many niches opened up. Evolution would go fucking crazy. Like, invent a fish competition level stuff would start existing in the world. Think about how many niches would open up if the fish just disappeared. Because keep in mind, at the moment, those ecosystems still are functioning. They have now an opening for something that would act like a fish. So would fish re-evolve? It wouldn't be the same thing, but re-evolve from aquatic vertebrates? Or would something else entirely fill their place? You know, would we evolve something different? Let's say, I don't know, there's a huge outburst of salamanders. All of the salamanders across the world suddenly have a crazy evolution, and now are adapting into the ecosystems that fish used to be. And now we have salamander species everywhere. We used to have fish, or maybe frogs, maybe like aquatic swimming frogs, tadpoles that never evolve into frogs and stay as tadpoles. You know, say a tadpole doesn't reach maturity, and it takes the explosion, the niche of where fish used to be, and now you've got tadpoles all over the world that stay as tadpoles their whole lives. All sorts of really cool shit could happen. There's tons of interesting ideas. Obviously, this is not a reason to cause all fish to disappear or to cause ecosystem collapse. But as long as we're doing a thought experiment, it is kind of cool. And that is all. Yes, it would also affect the AVNJ upload schedule. I think it would be a little bit harder to make. I guess I could make fish videos about all the fish that there used to be. And I bet I would get tons of views for a while talking about how every fish disappeared and why. If every fish in the world disappeared right now, my channel would blow the fuck up. Everyone would be like, explain, help, what the fuck's going on? This is what I talk about when I say like global fish crisis. They listen to the fish biologists. It would go crazy overnight. All right, that is all for that presentation. Hopefully the insect population would stay intact. I highly doubt it. The amount of ripple effects that would occur. Whoa.